So thank you everyone for joining. This is part 9 in the 10-part xAPI and Articulate Storyline series. We're almost through all 10, and we're doing something new today. So the last 8 sessions have been all about how to send data from a storyline course to a learning record store. Now today we're doing something different. We're looking at how we can pull data from a learning record store. So it's a bit different. This is one of the advanced tutorials, but I think, except for some code that's kind of confusing that I've wrote and pieced together, which we can just copy and paste, I think you're gonna have a really solid understanding of what we're doing now, because most of you have been here to build the statements and structure the statements. So now querying them is a bit easy once you know what your boundaries are. So let's get started on this. I'm going to share my screen. Again, we'll want to open up Visual Studio Code or whatever code editor you've been using. All right. So first things first, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm just going to create it here on my desktop. And we will name it Query the LRS. You can name your folder whatever you'd like. But this is what's going to be holding our files today. So once you've created that folder, let's go into Visual Studio Code and create a new file. Or again, this can be whatever code editor you choose to use. So we will save this new file as query.js. Where it says save as type, we don't want it to be plain text. So I'm just going to select all files. And we're going to save this file in the query, the LRS folder that we just created. Okay. So I'm just going to save that here. So we're not working from our previous file. That last file was to send statements. If you have it open, go ahead and leave it open because we are going to need to set the conf object. Okay. So I copied and pasted this from my tutorial. I'm going to paste the link to this tutorial right here. This is the text-based tutorial, how to query the LRS. It's devlinpeck.com/tutorials/query-LRS. So there will be some code in here that we'll be referencing. And the code I copied and pasted is right here. It's just this code to set up the conf object. If you want to query your learning record store, then go ahead and set the username, password, and endpoint to whatever you are using to send the xAPI statements. So you'll probably have this in your xAPI statement.js file that we've been working on previously. But if you want to send it to my learning record store, then, or if you want to query my learning record store, then you can just use what I'm going to use. And I'm going to sign in here. So I'm setting it to veracity. Here's my crowdcast LRS that I set up. Here's the endpoint. So I'm going to copy this and paste it. And then to get my username and password, let's see, where do we go? Access keys. And then here's the username and then the password. And I'll paste this for you all if you want to query my LRS. Okay, so I'm going to save this. I will copy and paste this for those of you who want to query mine. You can copy and paste our endpoint and auth from the other JavaScript file, yes. Because again, we're using the xAPI wrapper here to set up our config. This is the config we can use to send or retrieve statements. So all we need to do is get authenticated with the LRS. So and the way to do that, it looks the same whether we're sending or retrieving. So yes, you can copy and paste this if you had it already. I do want to show you something though. So if you set up your learning record store with veracity on one of those, I think on the week 3 when we did this together, or if you've been following the tutorials, we did something with this access key. So everyone's going to need to change this. So navigate to your learning record store in veracity, and then click on where it says, one access keys. We're going to select that, and we need to modify this key. So I'm going to press this little edit button in the top right of this card. I'm going to select edit. And the reason is because we did not turn on read permission. So, what most learning record stores, you'll have an option to turn on write permissions and to turn on read permissions. Write permission gives you permission to send statements to the learning record store, and read permission gives you permission to pull statements or read statements from the learning record store. So we had originally had this off, and you can see why you might want to make multiple keys. Say we make a different key that has read permissions that we only use in certain apps that are more secure. For now, though, I'm just going to turn read permission on for my default, standard key, and I need to save this. Okay, and then press edit again to save it. So right here where it says permissions, read should be true and write should be true. And if you have a different learning record store, that interface will look a little bit different, but you will want to make sure that read permissions are turned on so that we can query the learning record store. Okay, so we need another line of code. I'm going to paste that. We're going to create a new variable called parameters, and the value of this variable is going to be an xAPI wrapper method, this search params method. So we've looked at this before, like ADL.xAPI wrapper.changeConfig. The xAPI wrapper eases communication between the client, the project we're working on, and the learning record store. So it lets us use these easy commands like change config and search params. So just know that this is a command for the xAPI wrapper. Pasted that there. Yeah, I will address security issues. Yeah, we'll talk about security later in this session. Once we get this working. Okay. So we have this set up. Now we need to talk about how we can actually query the learning record store. So we can't just query the statement on any element that we want. I'm going to show you the different ways that we can. So because a statement can have the agent, which will be the user's email address. It can have the verb they're performing, the object they're performing it on. But like we've looked at in last sections, we can also report quiz scores and open text responses, and we can add context and extensions to our statements, but we cannot query based off of all of those things. For example, I can't say, oh, show me all of the xAPI statements where someone responded choice A, okay? So let's look at what we can query by. We can query by statement ID. I'm not gonna spend much time on this one. Not often we're going to want to do that. We can query by agent. So this is one that will be very popular. We'll say, show me all of the xAPI statements where the email address matches the email address I'm putting in right here. Okay. So that's a common one. We want to maybe pull, and we can do this with variables too. Maybe we query all of the statements for the email address that's associated with that user's account. And then that's when we would look at it and say, okay, now that we have all these statements from this user, did he answer this last quiz? Did he answer this quiz or pass this quiz successfully? If not, maybe we show him additional resources in this course. So we'll talk more about use cases later on. I don't want to get ahead of myself. So by agent, and whether that's via email address or account, which we covered briefly earlier on, we can query by Verb ID. So we can say, okay, show me every time someone initialized this course, every time someone answered a question, anytime someone viewed a resource, Verb ID. I think we're all familiar with that by this point. Activity or object ID. So again, nothing new here. This is just the object ID. So, our object ID in the storyline course was like example.com/question1. So we just use a sample URI. So we have the three basics, the agent, and however we're identifying them, the verb ID, and the object ID. Now these ones get a bit more complex, and again, you probably wouldn't need to use them super often, but just know that they are available. You can query by timestamp, so you can say, give me all of the statements after this certain date or before a certain date, and that's it. Okay, so it might be a bit underwhelming, but this is all we can query by. Now that being said, okay, and we can combine queries too. So I can combine querying by agent, verb ID, and object ID. So I can say, show me every time Devlin Peck answered, which would be the verb ID, question 1, which would be the object ID. And I'm gonna show you how we can do this in a minute. But yeah, we can combine as many of these queries as we want. And what that will do is it will return all of the statements that match this query in one big object. So even though we can only query by these elements, we'll have access to the entire statements, just like we do in the learning record store. Like for example, if I say show me every time devlinpeck@gmail.com failed quiz 1, it will return this full statement will be available to us where we can see the score, we can see the response, the success, we can see the duration. We just can't query and say, okay, show me all of the statements where someone spent longer than 15 seconds on the course. So I want everyone to be clear on that. Just because we can't query by those other elements, it doesn't mean that we will not have them available to us. Any questions so far? It might be confusing because I'm just kind of walking you through it right now. We're not actually performing it yet, but that's where we're going next. So maybe we should do that. So let's look at how I would pull all the statements by an email address. So we would type in this variable name, parameters, and then in square brackets, we would type the type of query that we're performing. So you can follow along and do this with me. So we're going to say, look at our parameters variable, and we're just using a command to search. This isn't really important. This is just know that the xAPI wrapper, which we're setting up right here, is enabling us to use this simple format. Parameters, and then in square brackets, the type of query we're performing. So right now we're performing agent, and then we would just type in the object that we want to query. So we're going to do mbox mail to devlinpeck@gmail.com. Boom, boom, boom. So this is what it would look like for me. Be careful with your quotes. You can use double quotes on the outside and then single quotes on the inside, or you can do the other way around. But just don't try to use all double quotes because it's gonna mess things up. Because the single quote, if anyone has questions about that, let me know. But I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Because if I put a single quote here and then start trying to start mail to with a single quote, it's just going to end this first string. So we need to, nest it. If anyone wonders where we're getting this from, here I'll open up our old JavaScript file. I think the latest was measured duration. So this is what our xAPI statement looks like. You see, we say we want to pull the agent. So we would just take this object right here. This is what we're identifying the agent by. Mbox, mail to, and then their email address. So when I'm setting that up over here, I just want to put that object in here. And this is defined by the xAPI spec. Again, I designed this text-based article to serve as like a quick reference for this. So you can also copy and paste it from this, this text-based tutorial. All right. So, and once we have all of the parameters there that we want, we would have to send the query. So I'm going to add this right here too. So I pulled this from the tutorial. Yeah, agent, remember, agent is a type of actor. The actor can also be, here, I could even pull up the resource. It's a good question. It's good to refresh these things because I know I was confused about that for a while too. So give me 1 minute here. I don't remember which tutorial we went really in depth, but the agent can be, or the actor can be An agent, it can be a group. So it can be like a team performing an action. I'm sure there's more that the agent or that the actor can be. Let's see, xAPI actor. Okay, so it can be an agent, it can be a group. And those are the two I'm seeing right now. I'm not sure what else would make sense here, but we're using an agent because we're just a single person. So this would be okay, but let's I think, for all of the statements in my learning record store right now, I think I use this email address for all of them for these crowdcast examples. So let's get a bit more specific. So now let's say which verbs we want to query for. So we can do parameters verb. And now we would put the verb ID in quotes. So how I'm going to get access to that is I'm going to just look over here in my learning record store. Let's say we want to pull all of the times that I answered a question. Okay. So I can look right here, and here's the verb ID. I just use this adlnet.gov verb or answered verb ID. So I'm going to select this to copy it. I'm just going to paste that in right here. Oh, it came with quotes attached, so make sure there's only quotes before and quotes after. So with this query set up like this, it will send the query to the LRS, and it will return all of the statements where devlinpeck@gmail.com is the agent, and this verb ID right here for answered is the verb. Okay, so I want to show you this in action. Does anyone have any questions up until this point? Because what we need to do next, so this is going to return what we want, but the problem is we don't have any way to display it right now. So what I did, and what might get slightly confusing, is we need to build an HTML page that's going to display all the statements that get returned. Okay, so this is where we set up our query. This is all fine and good. This right here says, okay, now get this command, this xAPI wrapper command says, okay, now get the statements that match these parameters and set whatever gets returned equal to this query data variable. Okay. So now let's build the HTML page. So in your code editor, go to File, New File. And I'm going to go to File, Save As. Sorry, this light just got super bright. Okay. So we're going to save this file as index.html and save as type. I'm going to do all files. And notice this is getting saved in the query, the LRS folder, where my query.js file is already saved. So index.html, save as type all files. Go ahead and press save. So now we have our JavaScript file here and our index file right here. I'm going to copy the code from this tutorial because I already built this once before. So I'm going to copy this from right here, and I'm just going to paste it. Notice this is a little bit more than halfway down the page. It's under this viewing the returned data heading. Okay, so I'm going to copy that and paste this into here. I'll paste this link again in the chat in case anyone needs it. Okay. So looking at this, and based off of what we've been talking about with these commands we're executing, is there anything that's missing from this folder, this query the LRS folder? Just go ahead and let me know in chat if you can tell me what's missing from this folder. Any ideas? Yes, the wrapper, exactly. Nice, Colin. We are missing the xAPI wrapper because, we're using these commands like adl.xapi-wrapper.get statements and search params. And you notice here in the code we copied, we're linking to both of these scripts, the query.js and the xAPI wrapper, because we need that wrapper file if we're going to use these commands for this simple, browser to LRS communication. So I think you all know what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull it from, last week's output. So if anyone doesn't have that, I can actually just pull it from any of these. I'll show you where to get it though. So all I always do is I Google xAPI wrapper. Here we go. It's this first one. I go to installing the latest release. There's a link to the latest release. I'll share this link with you all. You can just go to that link and press this xAPI wrapper.min.js and it will start the download. And we need to put that into our query the LRS folder that we created today. So these are the 3 files that we need. Now, when we open this index file in our browser, nothing's really going to happen. I mean, we have a heading saying that says query results. That's all we're going to see though. So let me show you. So now we'll open this index.html file. And this is all we see, like I said. So what we need to do if we want to show the results that we've gotten returned is we need to add some JavaScript at the bottom of our JavaScript file. What that's going to do is it's going to populate all of the returned statements in an ordered list. Okay, so this is just some code that I wrote. I pieced it together a bit. I copied it and I'm going to go to the bottom of this file and I'm going to paste it. Okay, and I'll explain this in a minute, but for now I just want everyone to get this copied and pasted into their code. Okay, and this will make sense to some degree once we move through here. So I'm going to save this, and now I'm going to reopen this index page, and now we can see this. So it's including the actor's name, the verb, and the object. And I just put it in this, it's actually an unordered list. It's just a bulleted list. The name is different in these cases because every week I put in something different like Devlin function or Devlin duration. But I use the same email address, devlinpeck@gmail.com. And that's why the names are different, but the email is actually the same. Okay, any questions? I mean, again, this code is going to look a little bit confusing, but I want to show you all what's going on here. So I'm going to open the console. Now, if we look at the code, and if you remember, see right here, we set this variable query data equal to, this get statements command. So this command right here is going to look at all of our parameters that we set up, and it's going to return all of the statements that match those parameters. And we're setting it equal to this query data variable. So what we're going to do, what we can do in the console now is let's look at that query data variable and see, see what it's holding. So I can just type in query data. Okay, so I type in the name of the variable. Let me see if there are any questions. I don't think it's important to download the latest file. Like it's going to still be working. I mean, you can look at the updates and see what it provides, but yeah, I don't think it's super important. Everything we're doing works on the files that have been published years ago, so it's okay to use that. You don't need to re-download that minified xAPI wrapper file every time. But let's look at this. So we typed in that query data variable and it returned an array. Okay. So in this array, so there's some confusing things in here. So this is like a prototype. You don't need to worry about that second object, but look at this first item. And an array, I think we might have we covered that very briefly. An array in JavaScript is like a list. So don't copy what I'm doing here. But for example, if I say let pets equal cat, dog, and bird. Okay, so in this array, so it's basically just a way to make a list. It's different than an object, which uses these curly brackets. So if I want to get access to one of these items in the array, I would say, okay, get me pets, but then I would use a number to access the items by position. So cat and arrays it's called being zero indexed. So this might be a refresher for some people. Some others might be like, this is super basic. But if you've never heard of an array before, this first item is in position 0. This next item is in position 1. And this third item is in position 2. So I can call this cat string by saying pets 0. If I do pets 1, it will give me dog. And if I do pets 2, it will give me bird. Okay, so that's just a really quick crash course on arrays. Let's look back over here in the console. So we have an array, but it has 2 items. So the first, the 0 position is this statements object, or it looks like it's a statements array. So again, JavaScript can be super nested. So like this first item here can be the first item can be an array itself. Okay, so you see that? So now if I were to call pets 0, it would return this array in this first position. So, and that's what we're dealing with in this situation. This is an array with 2 items. The first one is the statements array that has all of our xAPI statements. And the second one is this prototype object, which we want nothing to do with. So notice if we just called query data, it's not giving us anything. It's just giving us this array with 2 things in it. Okay, so we need to drill a level deeper. We need to get query data dot statements. So we can access it like this because it's named. It's named statements. Or we can do query data and then 0. Whoops. Since it is an array, and we would want to get the first item in that array. Oh wait, that didn't work. Forget that. We're doing query data dot statements. So when we pull that, notice now it gives us these 11 statements. And this one's 10 because, again, arrays are 0 indexed. So there is a 0 here, and it goes up to 10. And I'm sure if we count these over here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So whenever you query the LRS, you can't just use that variable. You can't just use this query data variable to get access to all of the actual return statements. You have to set it equal to query data dot statements. And now if we expand these, watch, let's look at the first one. Here it is. Here's our statement. We can see my name, Devlin function. Here's the mailbox. We can expand the object one. Look, we have the definition even. Question in Devlin's practice quiz, question 3. Here's the activity type. So this is all stuff that we set up in previous questions. Here's the object ID. You just basically we're drilling down into this in the console. See, here's the result object. This is how many seconds we spent on this. Here's the actual response that I gave. So, notice we said give us all of the statements that match this agent and this verb, but the data that we get back, all these full statements are here, and we can drill down into them using dot notation. Okay, so I don't know how many of you are with me, but I do want to show you an example of this. So let's say from this very first statement, I want to pull out my name. Okay. So I would say query data dot statements, and then using that bracket notation like I showed you here, I would say give me the first one, give me the 0 position statement, and then I would say give me the actor and give me the name. Okay, so let me show you how I would do that. So we would say query data dot statements, And then I would use this bracket notation to get the very first item in this array. And then I would say dot actor dot name. And you see right there, Devlin function. When we're trying to get an item based off of its position in an array, we use these brackets. But we can also use dot notation to drill our way down this tree into the children. So you see query data dot statements, get this 0 array, dot actor, which is a child of the overall statement, dot name, which is a child of actor. And I'll show you just another example of how we can do the same thing to get the response. Okay, so then it would be query data dot statements 0 to get this first one, dot result dot response. So watch here. Whoops. Query data dot statements, get this first item, dot result dot response. And then it gives us that 45 we were looking at right here. Okay. So knowing how to do this is important because you're gonna when you're sending these queries from a storyline course, you're gonna know what data you want to get back. You might say, I want to see what this user answered to question 3 in this last quiz because if they answered this question incorrectly, I want to show this resource. And you're not just going to be able to say, show me the ones where they put this as the answer. You're going to have to say, show me the statements where they answered this question. And then you're going to have to use JavaScript to work your way down into the result.response property. Okay, so I know I still need to give you some additional steps to like how we actually got to this list of things. Are there any questions though? And if you're following and this is making sense so far, also let me know. Because I think, querying I think is new for most people here. Okay. Not seeing any questions. Okay. Making sense for you so far, you think? Okay, that's good. That's good. So let's look at what I did here. We're using some JavaScript concepts we haven't covered before. This for each, you notice right here. Yeah, I'll cover this more in depth. I think this might clear some things up. So look at this code that we copied and pasted this code earlier. So we're doing query data dot statements, remember, and this returns that array of all of the statements. So again, just to, I think we just covered this, but just to make sure we're all with me, what I do is I say, okay, give me access to query data dot statements, and that's what gives us all of these statements that match these parameters we set up right here. And then I say for each of these, this is a JavaScript command that we haven't covered before, but here's what it does. It says for each item in that array, we're going to execute this populate statements function on that item. So this line of code right here says, okay, on this 0 item, this 1 item, this 2 item, on every single one of these, we're going to execute the populate statements function. And if you look right here, here's that populate statements function. Okay. So basically, all you need to know is we're executing this populate statements function on every item that gets returned that matches these parameters. So now what this function does is it says, okay, give me the statement. So this function takes, this entire statement right here, this entire 0 item 1 with the actor, the verb, the object, everything. So it takes an entire statement object like this. Okay, so it has access to all of this data if it wants. And then it creates a new element on the page. This is just an HTML item. It's a list item. You don't need to know how to do this for storyline. This is just HTML. It's the code I put together to make it. See, this is a list item, this bulleted point right here. Okay, so it's saying for each of these statements, first create a new list item, which is going to give it a bullet point and make it, indented in the list. The next thing I'm doing is saying, okay, now we want to add some text to that list item. And this is just HTML and JavaScript code. You don't need to memorize this. Don't feel intimidated by this. But this next part is what's important. So I'm saying add some text to that bulleted item And here's what the text is going to be. It's going to be statement.actor.name, okay? Because we want the, and I showed you how we did that just before, you know? We're gonna go down into the actor, and then we're gonna go into their name. And you can see that right here. So I'm saying first take the actor's name, then we're going to add a space. That's all this is. We're starting a new string, and the only thing that this string contains is a space. And then I say take the statement.verb.display, and I want to do the English display. Okay, so we can look at that here in the statement. So statement.verb.display, and then this NUS. Okay, so I'm going to explain this syntax, why we use these brackets here in 1 second. Just bear with me for now. You can't use, I'll just explain it now. We can't use dot notation here because variables can't have hyphens like this. Okay, so this is trying to subtract US from EN. That doesn't make sense. And you see here, we need that hyphen because that's how the statement is defined. So another way, so instead of using dot notation, you can use bracket notation to have this same effect. And maybe I should show you that just so you can see what I mean. So we can do query data statements. Instead of query data dot statements, we can use bracket notation and those quotes to get the same effect. You see, we got the same return. Now watch this. We can do query data statements, and then just right into another bracket, and we can go to 0 if we want the first item in the statements, and then we can do actor, and then we can do name. And we get the same exact thing we got earlier, Devlin function. So you see here, this time I use full bracket notation, but dot notation, like we used right here, is just much more easy to write. We don't have to worry about the brackets. We don't have to worry about the quotations. But it is important in cases like NUS, where we have something that doesn't work with dot notation. We need this hyphen to be encapsulated by these quotes. So that's why we use bracket notation to get to this language code. Okay, so that's how we get to the verb's display property. And you notice, and you can see that here, answered, 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 answered. You know, that shows up in our list item. We add another space after that, and then we do statement.object.definition.name, NUS. So we're getting the object's name basically, and I'll show you where we get that. We're getting it from object, definition, name, question 2. So rather than putting the object's ID, which is just going to be this URI, we want to get the actual plain English name. So when we look at this and it says Devlin answered question 3, it just makes sense and is easy to see in English. Okay, so when we change this code right here, when we change constant new statement, and we're creating this text that's going to show up in this bulleted list, it's going to change what shows up on the page. So the only code after this is saying, okay, now append these items to actually get them on the HTML page. Again, not important. You're not going to be using this HTML code in your storyline course. You're just going to be, what you will be doing, I'm guessing, is you're going to be setting these values to variables, or you'll write some code to say, okay, if this, if result.response, or if result.success, let me just show you this example. If this result.success property is true, then we're going to set this storyline variable to true. Or if this, for example, if they passed or failed a quiz, you would query the LRS. You would say, okay, is this success property true or false? We're going to change a storyline variable now based on whether this is true or false. And then we can conditionally display some additional slides and additional scene based off of whether or not they successfully passed or failed this quiz. How are we doing? And I can show it. We can modify this code right here to show something different. So let's do that. So I just deleted this. Okay. So now say what do we want to show? Someone tell me what we want to show on this bulleted list. Any requests? Before we had the name, the verb, and the object, just like we usually have when we look at the learning record store. Devlin answered this, Devlin failed that. How about we do this? How about we do a query to look at all of the times that I passed or failed quiz 1. And then we can show on the bulleted list, we can show my email address, and we can show either true or false based off of whether I failed that quiz. How about we do that? Open text answers? Okay. We can do that first. Let's do that. So here's how we would build that query. So first thing I want to do is I want to look at the open text answer. Where do we actually? I'm going to turn on response. I want to see what verb we used with that. Okay, here's an open text answer. Okay, so I think the problem with this, because it's bad practice, because we're just using example.com/question2 for this open text question, but then we use this same ID for this multiple choice question 2 down the line. But that's okay, because the response to the multiple choice question and their response to the open response question, they're held in the same part of the xAPI statement. So let's do this. So let's look at all of the cases where anyone answered. So I'm just going to comment out this line of code by adding 2 forward slashes. When you do that, JavaScript just ignores this whole line of code. So we're not looking at who answered this anymore. We just want to know, let's look at all the times where someone answered something, and let's display statement.result.response. And I think that's it. I'm going to save that. And now let's go to this query results. And here are all the responses. So 45, blue. Here's the actual open text responses. It did not teach me anything. It was very easy. And then we have these placeholder responses in some of these. So that's why it's just an empty, empty thing here. Okay, so we did that one. Is that what we wanted to see? Cool. Yeah. And again, the reason we use statement here is because we're using this as an argument at this point. So again, remember, this function is taking each one of these statements in that array. So we're saying, okay, give us access to that array, and now look at the result.response, or to that item in the array, and then drill into that result.response object in that statement. Okay, so I forget what was the other example I give? Oh yeah, about passing or failing the quiz. So in this case, I don't want to have to type in, give me all of the cases where someone passed and all of the cases where someone failed. I'm going to query by object. Okay, so I'm going to say not verb, but object. Now instead of this answered verb ID, I need to get a hold of the object ID for quiz 1. So I'm just going to look at it here in the LRS. Here it is. It's an example.com/quiz1. Super simple. I'm just going to paste that right here. Okay, so now we're going to say, give us all the statements where the object ID matches this example.com/quiz1 object. And instead of showing statement.result.response, I want to see statement.result.success. Before that, like I promised, we want to see the user's name or the user's email address. So statement.actor.name plus boom, boom. Okay, so, or dot mbox. Let's try this. Okay, so we can see at one point, devlintech@gmail.com failed it, and then he passed it, then he passed it, and then he failed it. Okay. So that is what's going on here. So you see, we can just change out these parameters to query for whatever we're looking for, and then at this point, we can change what we actually want to see in that statement. And again, doing this on this page is mainly for testing purposes. You can save this somewhere safe, and if you know how to change these things, you can test your queries. But next week, we're going to look at how we can actually make use of these queries from a storyline course and change the storyline variables accordingly to get the kind of effects that we want. And particularly, we're going to look at how we can make a leaderboard. Okay, so I'll just show you a little preview. So this is what we're going to do. So, we looked at these quizzes. Here, let's not do quiz statement.result.success. Let's do statement.result.score.scaled. Okay, and that's going to show us the person's score. So you see here, I got a 0%, a 33%, 66%. We're in the next tutorial, we're going to be looking at this scaled score and placing users on a leaderboard based off of who has the highest score. So you can see an example of that here. That's what we're doing next week. Yeah, so I will stop sharing my screen for now. I know we wanted to address security. So if I were to work on this on a project where it's being hosted on the open web, and I have worked on some xAPI projects like that, I'm not going to want the read permissions turned on. I'm not going to want just anyone to be able to query the learning record store and pull access to all of the data. Because remember, these files, these xAPI files that we're including in the published output, they're out there on the open web. If people are web savvy and they know how to dig into this output, they can get access to your query.js file, and they'll see right at the top, here's how you're setting the credentials. Okay, here's how you're setting the person's user. Here's the password to get access to your learning record store that you can use to pull all of the data from, just like we're doing in this tutorial. So obviously 99.9% of people aren't going to either know how to do that or take the time to do that. But you don't want that kind of exposure if you're holding people's real information. So I'd say if you're hosting this on a learning management system where only only people who are part of the company and they're signed in, only those people have access to it, I would say it's not as big of a deal. Your own employees probably aren't going to sabotage your systems. It's calculated risk. You can hide the credentials by, okay, so there's client. I feel like you need to know this. You have to know the difference between client side and server side programming. So everything we've been doing now is on the client side. These JavaScript files, we're putting in the packages that we upload to the web, and when the user accesses our course, sorry about that, Melina. It's okay though. I'm just talking at the camera right now. So when someone accesses the course, all of these files that we're uploading are getting downloaded to their browser, basically. So they'll have access to it. That's how all of this functions. That's on the client side. So your computer, your browser, that's the client. The server is what it sounds like. It's a server somewhere on someone else's computer, and the client and the server can only communicate with very specific commands. You can't just write some JavaScript like we're doing, like, oh, we know there's this variable on the server called query data. Let me just type in query data and get access to that variable. Like on our results, we can even just type in conf, and then it will return the conf object with all of the credentials. So if those credentials are on the server side, people who are just accessing the course on their computer, they won't be able to get access to those credentials. Now, the tricky part is using the limited communication like HTTP requests between your client and your server. You need to figure out a way to identify the user, and that's usually done via a very long string, like a statement ID, like a unique long string with numbers and letters. And that's kind of like your token, okay? So then on the server side, you need a way to tie that user's token to that actual user, okay? So that's usually done with databases or other kind of back-end coding systems to match this person's unique ID to this actual person. And and then we can execute all of the send statement code. So it's a lot trickier. I haven't done this myself. It's something I'm going to be diving into from here because it does require back-end coding, and it requires you adding code to a server. So I've asked some really good developers about this, like the Veracity LRS guys. I started asking them about this because I want to implement it for myself, because again, I wouldn't feel comfortable using this approach just on the open web. And I would make sure when I'm implementing this for clients, they know the situation, which is what I'm explaining to you all now. Let me think. Okay, another way to keep this more secure is also tying it's with session IDs. So not only is this what this user's ID, but we also give them a unique session ID so that they can only access data from this specific session. So that's another way that people make it more secure. I've tried doing research about this, and it's somewhat limited, especially with the how-to. So I found this like conceptual understanding of it by looking at what people who have worked with xAPI much longer than me have spoken. There's a pretty good article about it, and I think the thesis was like, you're only as strong as your weakest link in the security. And I think the argument this person was making was like, there are much other places where security is probably weaker, like human elements are weaker. So in most cases, it doesn't make sense to put in all this additional effort to make these credentials more secure, because realistically, it's not a big risk that you're facing. Now, if this was like if I was in a state or a country with really enhanced data laws or privacy laws, maybe I would be more worried about this. But yeah, my takeaways, it seems like most people aren't really doing these super secure implementations just because the effort and the effort required isn't really justified. That's my impression. Like I said, I want to know how to do it. I'm going to learn how to do it, and I'll put out some tutorials for others once I get there. I think that's something I'll probably won't get down until next year, though, because I've got a lot going on. But that is a good question. Obviously, your head is in the right place. We don't want just anyone to be able to get these credentials and pull every single statement from our LRS. Maybe for little sample projects and stuff, it's not so important because we're not really holding sensitive data. It's someone clicked this, someone answered this. Yeah, but that is the answer. I'll give more details when I have them, and you can expect tutorials to come from that in 2021. Any other questions? And no worries if not. I feel like this one's a lot to take in. Definitely, check out this tutorial. And we didn't get super practical with it yet. We just looked at how to display it on a page, but I think next week it'll really come together of how we can use what we're getting back to change things in the storyline course. Oh yeah, I see there's another question here. How do we get the data in ASL? I don't know how to even answer that question. Do you want to elaborate on that question? Is it like is someone answering in ASL, or what would that format look like? Oh, articulate storyline. Oh, okay. I was thinking American Sign Language. Okay, good. Articulate storyline. Yeah, we're going to get there next week. It's going to be good. And again, next week is about how to use a leaderboard, but you'll be able to use these same principles to do adaptive learning. And I'll put out some tutorials on how to do that later on too. Cool, good stuff. As always, if you are getting value, feel free to drop a donation. No pressure, as always. And I'm really looking forward to seeing everyone next week. For those of you who have been here for the last 9 weeks hanging out with me and all of us, good stuff. I think I'll get that. I'm just going to put together a form for next week, and I'll put the link in the chat for people who want to sign up to do that presentation and present the project they've worked on. I think it'll be a really good way to show off your new skills, and hopefully we can get a decent audience to come and see what we've all been working on. Oh, I'm glad we have a few minutes left too, because the xAPI cohort is starting in 6 minutes. This is something put on by Torrance Learning. They do it they do it in like semesters. It's basically like it's something I learned about xAPI by doing the xAPI cohort, and it's where I really like push myself to actually learn how to implement it. They don't really cover what we're covering here. You're not going to learn how to send custom statements, but they have more general presentations once a week, and then people split out into project groups, and they work together to kind of build these xAPI enabled projects as a team. And maybe one person on that team will do the custom implementation, like most of you all know how to do. And other people on the team will do like, graphic design, or someone else will do the story to make a storyline course. And then other teams will just like look at the default output from the authoring tools. Other people will say, okay, let's see how we can get really detailed xAPI statements from videos. So there's all sorts of different project groups that cover, that dive into different aspects of xAPI. It's really community driven. So it's up to you and, the other people there of what the project groups are actually going to be. I found some of the weekly sessions informative, but yeah, I mean, if anyone's interested in that, check it out. If anyone wants to drop the link in the comment. I think with your skill set, you'll be really valuable to some teams, because this is one of the hardest parts of xAPI is actually sending the custom statements. So if you want to dive deeper or explore a different facet, that's a good way to keep going deeper with xAPI. And the timing is pretty nice. Right as we're wrapping up this series, that's getting started. So I'll see you all next week. I might go hang out in the cohort presentation in a few minutes. And yeah, thank you all for coming. Feel free to ask any questions if you have them throughout the week before we get to the next session. Okay, bye-bye, everybody.